Dull Knife Battle 1876 Wyoming Winter Massacre. 11 innocent babies froze to death in a single night. Their small bodies turning cold as their mothers desperately tried to keep them warm with nothing but their own bodies. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was the deliberate consequence of a U.S. military strategy. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of American history, hit subscribe now and join our Native Legends and History Stories community. What military tactics could be so brutal that they would knowingly lead to the deaths of dozens of innocent children? The tragic story of the Dull Knife Battle reveals the shocking truth about a forgotten chapter in America's westward expansion. Following Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876, the U.S. Army's approach fundamentally changed. General Philip Sheridan had already established the template. Years earlier, attack them in their winter quarters, destroy their villages and ponies, and then hang around the agencies to catch them when they straggle back. This wasn't improvised retaliation. It was codified military doctrine. General George Crook implemented this strategy with mathematical precision. Destroying winter food caches created a 3-1 kill ratio through starvation and exposure, compared to direct combat. Crook abandoned conventional warfare tactics, which had proven ineffective, at Rosebud Creek on June 17, when Crazy Horse's forces fought him to a standstill, and instead targeted the tribe's economic infrastructure. The military objective was quantifiable. For every tipi destroyed, approximately 6 to 8 tribal members would be displaced. Without shelter, for every food cache burned, 20 to 30 people would face starvation within weeks. This wasn't merely warfare. It was environmental leverage, using the -20-degree very Wyoming winter temperatures as a more effective killer than bullets. Crook's intelligence network was sophisticated. He employed 38 native scouts from 6 different tribes, including a Crow scout called Spot, whose tracking abilities were described as uncannily accurate. These scouts dureported that Chief Knife's northern Cheyenne camp contained approximately 173 lodges on the Red Fork of Powder River, housing roughly 1,000 people, making it a high-value target. Colonel Randall Mackenzie's strike force was precisely calibrated. 700 cavalry troops from 4 regiments, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, supplemented by 350 Pawnee and Shoshone scouts. The village contained approximately 200 fighting-age men, giving Mackenzie a 5-to-1 numerical advantage. The intertribal dynamics were equally calculated. The Pawnee and Shoshone scouts weren't merely guides, but strategic assets. They had lost territory to Lakota and Cheyenne expansion in the 1860s. Lieutenant John Bork wrote in his journal, "The Pawnee would rather kill 1 Cheyenne than 10 white men." Each scout was promised 3 captured horses, significant compensation when a single horse was worth approximately $75, equivalent to about $2,000 today. Within Dull Knife's camp, a critical strategic disagreement emerged. 3 Cheyenne scouts had reported soldier movements, and the camp divided along generational lines. Younger warriors advocated immediate evacuation, with one scout stating, "The bluecoats number more than leaves on trees. They come with the Pawnee and Shoshone. We must join with Crazy Horse tonight." Last Boole, the 61-year-old head chief of the Kit Fox Military Society, overruled them. Successful recent victories often led to tactical overconfidence among Cheyenne leadership. Last Boole had just led a raid against a Shoshone camp, where his warriors had taken 7 scalps without casualties. "The soldiers are slow and blind in the mountains," Last Boole told the council. "If they come, we will make them regret it," as Custer regretted coming to the greasy grass Little Bighorn. This single decision to celebrate rather than evacuate became a crucial turning point in history. The camp proceeded with a scalp dance ceremony that continued late into the night. This ritual demanded considerable physical exertion from participants, leaving them thoroughly exhausted by its conclusion. In the deep of night, when the celebration finally ended, the weary camp failed to post perimeter guards along their defensive lines. This critical security oversight did not go unnoticed. Mackenzie's scouts quickly identified this vulnerability as the tribe slumbered, setting the stage for the devastating attack that would follow when first light appeared on the horizon. The stage was set for what would soon become a textbook application of winter warfare doctrine. one that would lead to those 11 infants freezing to death as their mothers fled without adequate clothing or shelter into sub-zero mountain terrain. Colonel Mackenzie's troops navigated treacherous terrain throughout the night, stumbling over frozen creek beds and crawling through narrow ravines in pitch-black mountain passages. By dawn, they had positioned themselves east of the sleeping Cheyenne village in bitterly cold weather. Mackenzie's battle plan was straightforward. The cavalry would attack from the east, driving into the village while simultaneously capturing the pony herd and blocking escape routes. The Pawnee scouts would secure the western perimeter, creating a complete encirclement. As first light appeared, a Cheyenne sentry spotted movement on the eastern ridge. He immediately fired at the advancing scouts, shouting a warning before the scouts returned fire. The camp erupted into chaos as the alarm spread through the village. With surprise lost, Mackenzie ordered a full charge. Cavalry troops thundered into the village from multiple directions as the ground vibrated under hundreds of galloping horses. Inside the camp, Cheyenne mothers grabbed their children and fled with whatever they could carry. Most had no time to dress properly or gather winter clothing, forcing many children to run barefoot through the snow. Cheyenne warriors, many still half asleep, formed a hasty defensive line. Last Bull, wearing his ceremonial paint from the previous night's scalp dance, rallied warriors near the central fire pit to protect the fleeing families. The initial cavalry charge met fierce resistance, with several troopers falling in the first exchange of gunfire. Mackenzie quickly recognized a tactical problem. Cheyenne warriors had taken positions along the canyon walls above the village, raining down rifle fire on exposed soldiers. From these elevated positions, they controlled the battlefield despite being outnumbered to counter. This advantage, Mackenzie redirected his Cheyenne scouts to scale the steep southern bluff. Once in position, the Shoshone delivered withering fire onto the Cheyenne positions. This crossfire forced many Cheyenne defenders to abandon their positions. Hundreds of villagers fled northward across the frozen creek, attempting to escape through a narrow canyon. Mackenzie spotted this movement and dispatched Lieutenant John McKenna with a detachment of troopers to cut off the escape route. McKenna's men reached the canyon mouth just as the first refugees appeared. He ordered his troops to form a skirmish line across the passage, but Cheyenne warriors had already positioned themselves in rock crevices along the canyon walls. When McKenna's troops formed their line, the warriors opened fire from extremely close range. The first volley caught the cavalry by surprise. Several troopers fell immediately, including McKenna, who was struck in the throat. The remaining soldiers took cover behind boulders as the firefight continued, allowing dozens of women and children to escape through the confusion. Eventually, the soldiers retreated when their ammunition ran low. Back in the village, Mackenzie had consolidated control, despite the Shoshone scouts suffering heavy casualties, with about 20 warriors lost in the ridge fighting. Mackenzie then issued his most consequential order to burn everything in the village. Troopers moved through with torches, setting fire to all teepees. Winter food supplies, carefully accumulated over months of hunting, were thrown into flames. Caches of dried meat, berries, and pemmican that would have sustained the tribe through winter disappeared in minutes. Soldiers destroyed weapons, cooking utensils, and every blanket they could find. In one teepee, a trooper discovered military trappings and personal effects from Custer's 7th Cavalry, taken after the Battle of Little Bighorn. These items were seized as evidence of the Cheyennes' participation in that battle. Where a thriving community had stood hours earlier, only smoking ruins remained. The pony herd of approximately 500 animals was driven south, with many designated for the Shoshone and Pawnee scouts as payment for their service. By day's end, military casualties totaled 7 killed, including Lieutenant McKenna. With 22 wounded, the Cheyenne losses were far worse. 40 confirmed dead, with twice that number wounded. But these direct casualties were only the beginning of their suffering. The military strategy worked precisely as designed. By destroying the village's infrastructure rather than merely defeating its warriors, Mackenzie had created conditions where the environment itself became the primary weapon. The aftermath would prove far deadlier than the battle. With 11 babies freezing to death on the first night alone, This calculated application of environmental warfare represented the evolution of U.S. military doctrine against the Plains tribes. Rather than risk another embarrassment like Little Bighorn in direct combat, the Army had weaponized winter itself, allowing nature to accomplish what bullets often could. Not that night. The displaced Cheyenne fled northward through the canyon walls and into the frigid mountains. Families moved in small groups, carrying wounded relatives and supporting elders who struggled with each step. The rocky terrain tore at bare feet, leaving bloody tracks in the snow. Children who had escaped the morning's violence now faced an equally merciless enemy. The Wyoming winter, a November blizzard, descended upon the mountains within hours of their escape. Winds carrying ice and snow slashed at the refugees as temperatures plummeted well below freezing. With minimal clothing and almost no blankets or robes, the Cheyenne endured conditions that would challenge even fully equipped soldiers. Parents wrapped children in whatever scraps of fabric remained, often sacrificing their own minimal protection. The first night extracted a horrific toll. 11 babies froze to death in their mother's arms, their small bodies stiffening as desperate parents tried to share body heat. Numerous elderly tribal members also succumbed to the cold, their exhausted bodies simply shutting down. Those who survived the night awoke to find loved ones transformed into frozen corpses. With no means to properly bury their dead in the frozen ground, families were forced to leave them behind. A spiritual trauma beyond the physical suffering. The journey through the mountains took nearly a week. Survivors subsisted on whatever they could forage, pine bark roots, and occasionally small game caught by the few warriors who still possessed weapons. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, and ears. Pneumonia spread among the children. The wounded developed infections that turned limbs black in the cold. It took almost 2 weeks for the remnants of Dull Knife's band to locate Crazy Horse's camp, traversing nearly 150 miles of hostile terrain in winter conditions. When they finally arrived, their appearance shocked even their Lakota allies. Children with blackened extremities from frostbite, women wearing improvised footwear made from strips of their own clothing, men with untreated bullet wounds somehow still walking. The Lakota welcomed their Cheyenne relatives with horror and sympathy. They shared their own dwindling supplies, but the psychological impact of seeing Dull Knife's people so devastated ran deeper than material aid could address. The strategic implications became immediately clear to the assembled tribes. If they did this to Dull Knife's people, they will do it to all of us, a Lakota elder reportedly told Crazy Horse. The military planners had calculated correctly, witnessing the impoverished and beaten state of the once proud Northern Cheyenne convinced many other tribes that they could not risk subjecting their own families to similar fate. The psychological warfare aspect of the Dull Knife battle proved more effective than the actual combat. The defeat of Dull Knife's camp persuaded many Northern Plains tribes that the dream of driving white settlers from their homeland was futile. The human cost of resistance had become unbearably high. By late spring 1877, the Northern Cheyenne formally surrendered to the United States Army, effectively ending organized resistance in the region. Today, the Dull Knife battle site sits on private land. A modest monument stands at the location, dedicated to those who fought there. During summer months, the ranch occasionally offers tours of the battlefield, though public access remains limited. The 11 babies who froze to death that night were not simply collateral damage in a military operation. They were the calculated result of a strategy that deliberately weaponized winter against civilian populations. Their story reveals how the conquest of the American West often relied not on battlefield victories, but on creating conditions where survival itself became impossible for native peoples. The true history of America includes these difficult truths. If you value these untold stories that shaped our shared past, subscribe now to Native Legends and History Stories. These narratives deserve to be remembered, not just as historical footnotes, but as essential chapters in understanding how the country we know today came to exist.